So, by way of a very quick recap of what we've talked about in the other videos, your default state is well-being. And the only thing that ever holds you away from that default state, from experiencing that and feeling that well-being, is thinking, is personal thought. You're only always a thought away from returning back to that kind of natural default that is clarity and peace of mind and well-being. And a little on thought is that we're all living in thought-created realities. We get our entire experience of life through thought. Thought is unbiased and meaningless in and of itself. So our human mind attaches meaning to thinking, to the thoughts that arise within us. But in and of themselves, those thoughts have no inherent meaning or any kind of evaluation, or they're not opinionated or judgmental. We do that to thought. That's not the nature of thought. The nature of thought is that it's meaningless. It is habitual, meaning we have the same thoughts over and over, and you've probably noticed that. You have the same thoughts over and over, often throughout a lifetime, but definitely from day to day. There's a ton of overlap. The nature of thought is that it is always changing. And that doesn't always feel like the case. Sometimes it feels like we're stuck in a cycle of repetitive thinking. And sometimes we are, but that's not the natural state of thought. That, again, is something that we do. That's something we bring to the system. And we'll talk more about how we do that and why we do that. But that's human interference in the system. The actual nature of thought is that it's always flowing, always moving, always changing. So it just occurs to me as like the best, clearest example of bringing all of this together is kids. So when you think about your true nature being this peaceful, not necessarily happy, but definitely not unhappy, just a peaceful, clear state. You're kind of just a clear channel of well-being. Kids live in that much of the time. And again, if the only thing that's ever holding us adults, or anyone really, back from that is personal thinking, kids are a great example of this because they don't have a whole lot of personal thinking. Or probably more accurate, they do have thinking, we all do, but they don't relate to it in the same way that adults do. So adults tend to believe all of our thoughts. We're very much in our head, and when all that chit-chat is going on, we're listening to it, we're paying attention, we're believing it, we're thinking it's important, thinking it's meaningful, we're basing our actions on it, we're hanging on every word, and we're kind of just identifying with all of that mental chatter way more than kids do. Kids have a stream of thoughts as well. I think they tend to have less than most adults, but they have it nonetheless, and they just interact with it in a very different way. It's just there. They just don't pay that much attention to it. They allow their minds, because remember, the nature of thought is that it's always changing. Our minds are always changing when we don't stand in the way. They just sit back and they allow their minds to change. They don't feel the need to be consistent. They don't feel the need to figure things out with their thinking and their logic and their intellect as much as adults do. They don't feel the need to analyze things, and they really just don't try to make things much different than they are, because inherently they know the truth, and that is that things are always changing. We don't have to step in and make things change and make ourselves feel better. All we have to do is stand back and allow the system to do that naturally, because that's what it does. And it really can be an effortless process. So I love watching children. If you notice, kids can't hold grudges, and they try. My little kids will play, they get mad at each other, they'll stomp away and go sit in their separate corners. And it takes about 3 seconds usually until they're back together in the middle of the room playing happily. And I remember, being a kid and saying, I'm not going to talk to my parents, for 10 years. They're going to have to beg for my forgiveness. And that lasts usually about 10, 15 minutes. And then you're just over it, because that natural resiliency, what allows us to bounce back, we're just bouncing back to our true nature, which is right there. And the only thing holding us back from that is the extent to which we attach to all this thinking. All the thinking that says, no, I should be mad. I have a right to be mad. I'll show them. All of that stuff. When we're really attached to that, we can hold ourselves back from our true nature, from resiliency and from bouncing back. But we're the ones doing that. if you watch a kid and they're just more naturally in the flow, they just don't do that. So, it's a great just sort of challenge to just notice that for a little bit. Notice how you will naturally start to go back to your default peaceful state, and that when you're not doing that, you're attaching to some thinking that's preventing that. And just take a look at kids. You don't have to live with kids or have them, around you all the time. If you were a kid, which I'm guessing you were, remember back to how you used to think back then, and just notice it. There are so many kids around you to just notice. They're the perfect example, the perfect role models for us as to our natural default state and how life is supposed to go.